So I was watching Digibro's Gekko Estate episode 4 yesterday, and on Twitter I've been a huge fan of his Gekko Estate series. I think it's like the perfect fusion of the stuff that he was doing on his After Dark channel before with some of the stuff that he's doing on his main channel, right? Which is like those are videos that you can't put out that often, so the amount of like effect that they can have and the amount of reach that they can give you is like way less than what you can do with the vlog that's daily or like 4 or 5 times a week, which is the Gekko Estate are not. There's been 2 weeks and there's 4 episodes, so it's twice a week, but they're still so good at what they do because they're effectively like almost feature-length films which just describe what he's thinking about. And I watched this episode 4, which came out I think yesterday evening or something like that, and I watched it again in the morning today, and he makes this point about how he doesn't know about that much about Hunter S. Thompson, right? And that's something that it basically is his internet identity, because his main channel is called Otaku Gonzo Journalism, and Gonzo Journalism is something that Hunter S. Thompson was like, he created Gonzo Journalism. So he says he got called out on this on his Digibro versus Everybody stream, which I watched, and on this stream this guy is like, hey, you've read what works of Hunter S. Thompson have you actually read? And then Digibro goes like, yeah, I've only read his memoir Kingdom of Fear. And then the guy's like, oh, which got me thinking super hard, because even if he hasn't read all the books and he doesn't know anything, I think he said he only read the memoir and watched the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas movie. And it got me thinking, do you have to know everything about something to be inspired by it, right? Do you? I don't think so. And this is why I think you don't have to. Because just because you don't know every tenet of that philosophy or every like aspect of the idea behind the movement that you're trying to follow, it still inspires you to do something. And regardless of whether it was the actual thing, you don't have to like prescribe yourself to some label to say that, oh, I'm part of this movement and this is a, like, let's say postmodernism, right? Postmodernism, I'm part of the postmodern movement, this is a postmodern work. Why do you have to limit yourself to that label? Why do you have to study like every single thing that postmodernism is associated with and just try to do that thing again and again, right? How does that make sense? If you do what you think is postmodernism, isn't that more valuable for you as a creator, as an artist, than what you think is postmodernism and trying to follow that? Because you're limiting yourself again by only doing the things that postmodernism already talks about. For example, just this is a pure example. So Digi, when he does his version of Otaku Gonzo Journalism, it doesn't even matter if he's read the memoir or anything. He's just using that as an umbrella under which he does what he does, right? Which is making journalism, in this case anime reviews, more personal, more subjective, more related to the individual, rather than something that you can just put out of a 10-point scale and then throw up on Metacritic, right? It's something that's more individualized. Only he can make these reviews because only he thinks like this. He's not trying to abstract his opinion to something that can be applied to the entire community, because as he says repeatedly, opinions are subjective. Like, no matter how objective you try to be, in the end, your opinion is still subjective because it's an opinion, right? It's an opinion about art, and art is subjective almost by definition. So if you have an opinion about art and you're trying to claim that it's subjective, you're basically falsifying your claim. That's a false claim. It can never be true because it's not objective fact that something is good and something is bad. So why does it... what the fuck was I talking about? And really, that's why he also talked about why he changed his channel name from Digibro to Otaku Gonzo Journalism, because even though the channel name was Digibro, he felt like the content he was making earlier was more depersonalized than the content he's making now. Like, if you've watched any of the Gekko Estate videos, you know that's like, they're like super crazy and they do all this weird stuff, which apparently a lot of his fans have been saying he just does for pure effect. But I totally get it. Like, if you're making a video, you want that video to represent you, especially when you're making a vlog. Like, you want that vlog to be as representative of what you're trying to convey as possible. And if you're just doing a video where you just sit and you just talk into the camera, maybe it's not quite capturing what you're trying to convey. Like, it doesn't give that sense of like emotion or that feeling, right? Because you're just talking, which has been done so many times before. So by adding all these extra elements of like the music in the background, the like weird skits in between, he's actually like making the vlog more his, which is something that he's trying to do in general, and which is something that kind of inspires me, to be honest, because he's been making these analysis videos for a long time. And recently I spent like a whole day browsing the r/video essay subreddit for just to see like what the field is like out there. And there are a lot of analysis video essay type people. Like, if you're starting a new analysis video essay channel in 2018, like, I don't know how you can expect to be as successful as someone who started like 5 years ago, because you're doing the same thing, you're just talking about different topics. So even if you like perfect everything in your formula, like if you do a perfect Nerdwriter impression, what is the best that you can get? Like, you can get like the audience that Nerdwriter doesn't want, that wants to hear about the content that you're talking about, right? You've put like an artificial ceiling on your own growth just by doing that. So, and I saw some like really good, like well-voiced, well-edited, like pretty well-written video essays that are on a channel that only have like 6 subscribers or something, 6 subscribers from like 3 videos. And it occurred to me, like, nobody's trying to push the genre anymore, right? And this is something I talked about in a previous vlog, but nobody's trying to like push the video essay genre to a new level, like Digibro is trying to do, or like Endless Jest did in the past, where they took the idea of making a review of a show, and then they like elevated it to a different level by incorporating themselves into it. And that's what gonzo journalism is all about, right? So why does it matter if he's read the books or not? It doesn't really at the end of the day, because he's following the spirit of the quote, which inspired him to begin with. So if you're following the spirit of the law, as they say, does it really matter about the letter of the law? Maybe, maybe not. That depends on your interpretation. And this relates again to how he talked about Hayao Miyazaki, and how to Miyazaki it would only occur to make an anime movie the way that he makes them. But that is like inherently flawed in the assumption that anybody who's like making something just starts out making them all that way, right? It's a process, isn't it? And he himself in this video explains why it's a process, because he talks about his old videos, how they were so depersonal, and now he's moving in a new direction, which he feels is his true direction that he should have been doing the whole time. But he wasn't doing it the whole time. It's a process. So to say that Miyazaki and Anno and all those people just started out doing the things that they ended up doing them is like minimizing the process they took to become better, right? And that's something that I don't really feel comfortable with, because if you just classify people as geniuses and not geniuses, then you're like saying that only the geniuses will ever make something that's worthy of being remembered. And he says this about the movies that both Miyazaki and Anno and all these people, maybe not Anno, just Miyazaki, make, that will last the test of time, because they were made with the purpose of being something that future generations will look back on. Like My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away will probably be children's classics, or at least children's classics, and be revered by people who know what's actually happening for a long time, like for maybe more than 100 years. We don't know. Film hasn't existed for 100 years, so we don't really have anyone to look back on and say, oh, hey, this is a person that made movies more than 100 years ago that we remember to this day. But we do have other examples from like literature and stuff like that. Shakespeare is more than 500 years old, and we still remember him because he made his works with like, not, at the time that Shakespeare was alive, and I think this is a relevant example. There's a squirrel outside my door. Do you see this? Hey, squirrel. What's it talking about? Oh yeah, Shakespeare. So at the time when Shakespeare was alive, there were like 2 distinct types of people, right? Maybe not 2 distinct, but I'm just boiling it down to that, is there were people who made plays purely for entertainment's sake, to like entertain the crowd. And that was the main purpose of the play. So if you were doing that, you were doing really well at the time, because people who were entertained by your play, they would like laugh and they would show up more, and you get more money, because that's how it works. right? The more successful you are, the more work you get. So they'd get a ton of work. And then there was people like Shakespeare and other people who were trying to like make an artistic statement. He wrote Romeo and Juliet completely in iambic pentameter verse, which is it's a play that basically had never been done before. Why would you do that other than to say that, look at me, right? Look at me, I'm an artist, I'm amazing. Why else would you do that? There's no point to do it. Because at the time, the people didn't understand what he was doing. It was only like the noblemen and people that understood why this whole play was an iambic pentameter. It doesn't really make sense to do it for the common people, because they weren't even literate at the time. That's why they went to the plays. That's not their fault, by the way. That's the whole thing. But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you make things with an artistic purpose, they will last the test of time. That's the whole point. And it's not just geniuses who can do that. Anyone can do that. That's the whole point. With YouTube and anything you make now can be preserved forever. We don't know how long Google will last, but they're probably going to outlast you and me and the majority of people who are alive today, right? So you can count on YouTube being around for a long time. So anything you make will exist in perpetuity, more or less. So he says you should take them more seriously, and I agree. You should take everything you do more seriously because it's going to be around longer than you. So it only makes sense to take it seriously. But it's not just geniuses who can make something worth lasting. So let's not get bogged down too much by that whole genius rant. That's not what I wanted to say in the first place. What I wanted to say was, it doesn't matter who you are. The importance of making personal, like meaningful art to you is more important than ever, because the whole point of postmodernism is that there's everything that can be said has been said, and the only difference now is who's saying it and what specific things you can bring to what you're saying that makes it different from what anybody else is saying. Because the only thing that other people can't completely already do is tell your personal story, because only you have experienced everything that you've experienced, right? So it comes down to what can you say best because you have lived the life that you have lived. And that's kind of like a revolution in thinking, I think, because over the course of like our entire like modern history, it's been mostly what's a good idea? What can we do that people will like, that people will buy tickets to or whatever? Because it doesn't really matter what you say as long as it's commercially successful. And that's kind of the balance that is so hard to strike even now, even with YouTube, because YouTube does give this platform to people that traditionally have never had a platform, because it's never been as easy to make money doing what you want to do now as it has ever been in the past. It's easier now than it has ever been. But at the same time, it's still difficult to actually be successful while still making that something that's personal enough that it doesn't appeal to that many people. Because if you're making something that's that appeals to you the most, that's personal to you, it's so tailored to you that it won't really appeal to that many other people, because you're not sanding off the edges, you're not like polishing it up to make it more acceptable for the mainstream, right? And I'm not using like the mainstream as like a boogeyman to like kind of abstract the concept of like artistic success and like saying that being unsuccessful is a good thing, because it's not. If you're unsuccessful, that just means that your art isn't viable in the market. And what that means for you is that you can't ever make a living doing just your art. That's not something that you will find possible, because the number of people that like your stuff is not enough to support you artistically. And now this isn't as much of a problem these days because you do have Patreon and things like that, which allow you to get money from people based on just that they see your content. You don't have to get like 150,000 views for every video just to make a living. You can have like 45 patrons that each contribute like $10 each and have enough money to like do this as a like second job to your first job or something. That's a viable road that you can take. But what the fuck was I talking about? And it's not even like we can go back. There's no going back. It's not even possible, because one of the things that Alvaro Enrique talked about in his interview with the Library of Congress is that the postmodern art is such a radical departure from what we had before, right? From the movements that came before it, that it's basically impossible to go back, because once you've like read something that's postmodern, going back to something else, it feels like you're missing something. And so the last book that I read to completion was Alvaro Enrique's Sudden Death. And that book is extremely postmodern. It references all kinds of things, right? It references like emails that he had with his editor. It references like different historical texts that he read while writing the book. It's like super meta, because just go listen to the podcast I made about that and you understand why it's meta. Maybe, I don't know. I was kind of ranting on that too. But before I get too distracted, what I wanted to say was, and after that, I then read Ryunosuke Akutagawa's Rashomon and 17 Other Stories. And every time I read it, and he's not even like the most classical writer or whatever. He's kind of ahead of his time a little bit, I would say. But when you read his story, you feel like you're missing something, because it's just a straightforward, like, linear narrative from start to end. There's no twisting, there's no subverting the, like, narrative expectation of, like, the payoff that'll come at the end of the story or anything like that, like putting the end at the beginning, and all the stuff that we're used to with postmodernism. All that stuff doesn't exist when he was writing in 1919 and 1920, right? So we're kind of stuck in this system, so we might as well get used to it and just do what we're supposed to be doing right now. And until something equally radical comes along, we're not going to have any option but to do this. So there's no point like saying that, oh, hey, like every single, for example, just tech videos on YouTube is something that really annoys me a lot. Like every single tech YouTuber makes the same video. It's just about a different topic. They're not doing anything special. And one of the channels that I think was doing something a little bit different, they're not like perfectly categorized as tech YouTubers, are the people from Digital Rev TV back in the day, because they took like a formula from a different show and they incorporated it with camera reviews, which is something that we don't really see that much. Most camera reviews are just straightforward, take the camera, go take a couple pictures, like go watch Philip Bloom, he'll tell you what that's about, right? That's not, is this fucking thing recording? Back to what I was saying. So they did like a whole Top Gear thing. And the Top Gear that they did was, because they were based out of Hong Kong, was so unique to them. Because there's not many camera reviewers from Hong Kong. So they would like, it would be like the main guy and his friend, they'd go out with two cameras and like do two specific things. But the whole thing was already like, it was planned from the beginning, because this camera's good at this thing. It was like Top Gear, basically, with cameras. But because it was set in Hong Kong, you see all these like different things that you wouldn't see otherwise if it was just set in the US or whatever. And that's like specific to them. Only they can make a Hong Kong version of that show. And I thought that was so cool. And that's kind of like what we're supposed to do now. Because one of the things that I think about a lot, and this is one of the things that maybe like the mainstream, or not the mainstream, but like the mainstream counter mainstream, like the mainstream subversive movement, what they talk about a lot is that identity itself is like a bad thing. Like you shouldn't identify yourself as anything. And one of the problems I have with that statement is that if you're sufficiently acceptable, like if you're from, I don't want to reduce it to this, but this is basically what I'm trying to say, is if you're white in a country that's majority white, you have the luxury of having your identity be what you are. Like you don't have to be like, hey, I'm an Anglo-Saxon person from whatever country, my parents from 3 generations ago came here or whatever. You don't have to do any of those things. You can just be like, hi, I'm Ben, or I'm Tom, or whatever the fuck. And I'm like, I like cameras, I like writing books or whatever. Because when a person sees you, they don't see someone different. They don't identify you. Like when someone sees me when I'm walking in the street, the first thing they think is not like, oh, hey, that guy has a camera. Oh, what's up with that? They're probably thinking like, oh, hey, what's that Indian dude doing with the camera? Like that identity, even if I don't want it to be a part of who I am, like I grew up a lot in India, but I've been outside of the country for a sizable amount of time now that it doesn't really like hold any special attraction for me. Obviously, it's like a wonderful place to visit, and maybe I might even go like live a couple years there at some point. But
it's not something that I like uniquely identify. The first thing I tell people when I meet them is not like, oh, hey, I'm from this particular town in this particular part of India. That's not what I say, because I don't consider that to be very important. I consider other things to be more important. Like, hey, I write a lot. I make YouTube videos sometimes, less often than I should probably. And I think those things are more important. But at the same time, even if I want only that part, like only the content of my character to be my identity, we're not yet at the point where that's possible. And if you're an idealist, I get it. You're like, okay, what if we were in a Star Trek future where, everyone is like completely equal and there's no question about that whatsoever. Post-scarcity society completely, right? If we're in that kind of society, I have no problem with that. I'm fine. But we're not in that kind of society yet. So to completely dismiss identity as any source of, as a thing of any importance, I think, is just being kind of naive about the world at large.
And that's where someone like Karl Ove Knausgaard comes in, right? Because the style that he created with his My Struggle book series of novels, like 7 books exclusively about his life, is the hyper-realist style, right? And in that book, he goes on, he talks about like the exact moment at which he's writing that particular page. He's like, I'm sitting here at 12:15 a.m. Writing this page, looking out, and he like describes the entire environment around him. And the whole point of this is to put you in his shoes in a way that otherwise you could not have been. Like, a person is not like a single instance in time. Like me right now, I'm 22, but I'm not this vertical slice of a life that's going to go from like 0 to like 75 or whatever, right? I'm not this one vertical slice. A person is like the entire summation of their being. So in that book, he talks about, or he assumes the point of view of his younger self, like his 8-year-old self, and he goes through the events that happened to his 8-year-old self from the same kind of like detailed perspective that he talks about his 39-year-old self. And when you read both these things together, they're completely different people. The only thing uniting them is that they are the same person. If you saw them both at the same time, you would not think that they're the same person, but they are, right? And this is kind of the thing that some time travel movies go into, like Looper and stuff like that. It's like, you might not see yourself as that 39-year-old when you're a 9-year-old, but eventually you will be that person also. So I think that's first of all, that style is really cool, and I think that's like a very unique way of looking at things, because it's not something that we see a lot, and it's something that I'm trying to incorporate as well to what I'm working on right now. I haven't worked on for a few weeks, but I will eventually get back to it. And the whole point is to make it more unique to you. That's the whole point. And this is like the ultimate way of doing that, is to like be so specific that literally no one else could tell that story except you. And that's like the logical end of the trend that we're experiencing right now, right? Because on one hand, you have like TV and like completely depersonalized, objective, abstracted content. And then in the middle, you have YouTube, because YouTube is like, when you see a vlog, you assume that that person is being truthful just because of the way it's presented and the medium in which you're seeing it. YouTube as a place is not generally known for like people like projecting a self-image, or hasn't historically been known. Right now, I would say, is one of those periods of time where it's trending more towards that, where people like project an image and then they do whatever it takes to make that image seem real, but historically that hasn't been a thing. So, and then that's in the middle. And on the right side, you have like some parts of YouTube, and then like books and other things, other types of media that are like trying to push the edge into being more and more personal, more and more specific. Because, and I saw this in a School of Life video that came out yesterday, which I completely objected to, is they were talking about, why are you reading a book about another person when you should be reading a book about you, right? And that seems like one of those memes that you find on a poster, and they like really explain this for like 4 minutes, and I was like, wait a minute, what the fuck are you talking about? Because when you look at yourself, you can't take a third person perspective and like assess yourself in a way that isn't tempered by you being you. Like, if you have a giant zit on your nose, you're going to think it's smaller than it actually is, just because, this is an example. I'm not, like, saying all zits are smaller than they appear or whatever. I'm just saying, if you have a zit, you're going to think it's smaller than it is just because you're seeing it all day, every day. And it's like, oh, it's not, if you just ignore it, you're not going to get annoyed by it. But someone else looking at it will be like, oh, there's a giant zit on your nose. And you're like, yeah, okay, thank you for that. So I don't know what the point of that whole analogy was, but I'm trying to say that if you take you can't really take a third person perspective on your own life to assess it like an impartial person would. So reading a book about another person who's similar to you in a way that you don't expect is an amazing way to like get a look at your own life, which is the School of Life video was talking about. So when other people are making this insanely personal art, it's not so esoteric and so confined to their own experience that other people can't access it. That's not the point at all. The point is actually the opposite. By being so specific, it's like you know that person. And if you know that person, you can take the things that they're experiencing in their life and like apply it to your own life, because that's the whole point. In this book, this Mr. Knausgaard, Karl Ove Knausgaard, he talks about his like struggle that he has with parenting, because he was raised in a way that was so detached, which is something that I think a lot of people can relate to, right? Like a lot of people can relate to having parents that were really hands off and just let kids do whatever they want, who they wished would take a more active role in their life. And he's doing not the opposite, but he's trying to be more involved in his children's life, and he finds it really a struggle, more or less. The series of books is called My Struggle. There's going to be some struggle in there at some point. So he talks about this, and he talks about it in a way which you don't really hear about in the mainstream, because childcare is one of those things like, yeah, I love my kids, you know, like when that baby came out, it changed my life. I can't even imagine going back to what I was before. That's like the accepted narrative, and we don't question that at all. But that's not always the case. Like, mothers deal with postpartum depression and all these like various different things that come with raising children. It's like one of the most difficult things that you can do. So he talks about it in an honest way, that while being super specific to his particular life, is also like insanely generalizable, just because it's a real human experience, and human experiences are universal. There's not anybody who has an experience that no other human has ever had, because like I said before, all the ideas that can be, or all the thoughts that can be expressed have usually already been expressed. There's like not much chance that you're going to do something completely new. That's not really a possibility. So you just have to do it through your own lens, because that's the only thing that's completely unique, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Okay, fuck this.